Shots fired. Shots fired in Canberra, of all places. Bit of a Sunday afternoon, evening SitRep for y'all. Hope you're doing well out there. It's 14th of August 2022, and this is the SitRep for today. Bit of a special late night one. I was going to just let this one slide by. Had a few stories that came up. I was going to let it all slide by until tomorrow morning, and then started getting peppered with messages from everyone about a gunman in Canberra airport this afternoon. So I thought, what the hell? I'll jump on and have a chat about this. So obviously starting off here in Australia, and not only in Australia, but in the closest city to where I live. Good afternoon to you, Stephen Richards, 66 from WA. Canberra airport has been evacuated after gunman fires shots in the check-in area. Interesting stuff happening there. Canberra airport, for those who haven't been there before, is not exactly a large airport. In fact, it's quite small. Basically, you walk in through the doors and there's maybe 8 check-in rows on the right, which is Qantas and Jetstar's, and then another 8 on the left, which is the Virgin Australia one, and then right in the middle is security. And there's usually a fair amount of AFP, Australian Federal Police, floating around there. So apparently they stepped in and stopped this person. I was holding off to try and find some more information on it, but none has been released that I've seen yet on who it is or what it was about. Possibly just some crazy person. But as I've been saying now for a number of weeks, the economic situation, the world situation, what we've just been through for the last 3 years, what we're heading into, the indoctrination of fear that we're constantly being fed at the moment through our mainstream media, is going to manifest in increased violence in individuals and in societies. And we're seeing it already, and this is just part of that. We're going to see more of these sorts of actions happen. And I've said this for years, because I teach a lot of people on my sort of survival courses and urban survival type courses who live in Canberra. And Canberra is a very, very safe place, crazily safe place. And so I say this sort of stuff and they go, well, things won't happen in Canberra. I go, well, the fact that things haven't happened in Canberra kind of tells me that things probably are more likely to happen in Canberra. On a long enough timeline, something is going to happen in all places in the world at some stage. So the fact that it hasn't happened yet is only increasing the odds that it will. So that's, I think, what's going on there with Canberra. Advisor 202199 says, what are your thoughts on the digital currency rolling out as early as end of September? My thoughts on it are nothing good. I don't like digital currency. It's not like it's even a conspiracy that it can be tracked. It's like overtly being tracked, and I don't like that. I don't like the fact that we can have our purchases and things tracked. I mean, a lot of our purchases are tracked nowadays anyway, but there is a layer that somebody has to actually get through in order to get that information. Usually it's just a business who will sell you that information, but that's one thing. A digital currency will mean that final layer is gone. And it's another sort of stab in the back for cash society. Peter Rouse asks on YouTube, how's that possible with the firearm regulations? Well, you can own firearms in Australia. It is possible, but as with any part of the world that has been proven time and time again, when it comes to restrictive gun laws, the criminals don't care. People who are going to go mental and shoot people don't care what the gun laws are. They'll get access to firearms. So I have no idea what this person was doing, what kind of firearm they were firing with. None of that information came out. All that we could see was a photo that was posted online of some of the shots that were in the windows. So fired into the windows. No people were injured from the reports so far. And the person that was the shooter was arrested by the AFP. Now, the shots into the windows didn't break the windows, didn't shatter the windows, but those windows, I would imagine, would be protected would have some sort of blast film or something on them. So it didn't seem like, looking at those, and this is just a blurry picture that I saw on the internet half an hour ago. So, take that for what it is. But the shots that I was seeing in the window didn't look like they were high caliber shots. They didn't look like they were maybe even, possibly not even high velocity rounds. So we're talking something maybe a 22, a 9mm pistol or something like that. Yeah, I don't know. It definitely wasn't a shotgun. Didn't look like a shotgun. It did look like single shots that were fired. And there was only 3, I think, on that photo. So who knows? Who knows? Commie Killer 2 says, heard about that mass shooting in Queensland last week. No, I did not hear about that one. Perhaps you could enlighten me. All right, let's jump into the rest of the news. So that's obviously something a little exciting in my part of the world that's going on. But there's more stuff happening in Australia. Australian politician issues Taiwan conflict warning. So the now leader of the opposition, Dutton, has come out and said, the opposition leaders has come out and urged people to cut through the propaganda coming from China amid high tensions in the Asia-Pacific region, and see the real message, as he's put it. Quote, nobody should be surprised if there is an incursion or if there is a conflict between the Chinese, because the Chinese said they'd be taking back Taiwan, come hell or high water. This is what Peter Dutton said on ABC Radio National on Thursday. So interesting stuff coming out of Peter Dutton. But to be fair, this is not anything new from Peter Dutton. He's been very anti-China and very pro-conflict with China. In fact, you could say that the path that the Australian military is on at the moment, which is one of growth, was being set out by Peter Dutton. And what we're seeing now, the military growth that we're seeing now, is just the after effects of Dutton, even though he's no longer, obviously, the ruling party of Australia now. Take the Ride asks, hasn't China threatened Australia recently as well? Yeah, they were doing it on the daily. Back when we had ScoMo, Scotty Morrison, as our PM, when he wasn't off gallivanting on holidays, when natural disasters were happening in Australia, he was quite often poking the panda in the eyeball. He also, so Peter Dutton was his defense minister, and Scott Morrison was the PM at the time. So he also was a bit like anti-Chinese aggression, and was very much in the camp of, hey, we need to build up because China's coming. So yeah, we threatened them. We pushed, or Scott Morrison definitely pushed the point of the lab leak, and that caused a lot of issues. One of those big issues was that China stopped buying all Australian coal. That then got reneged. Very quietly, I will add, they started buying Australian coal again when they realised that rolling blackouts and crippling their own industry because they don't have electricity for it isn't going to work for them. So they've come back to the coal. We've got the good stuff here. But obviously all this sort of stuff this sort of rhetoric is bouncing around. It's not new that it's bouncing around, but it is kind of increasing in fervour. From my assessment, at least, they're increasing it. Let's jump over to China now and see what they're doing. People's Liberation Army has fired missiles into Japan's economic exclusion zone as a direct warning from China to Tokyo not to join the United States in interfering with Beijing-Taipei or Beijing-Taiwan relations. So this is one of the big things, because I don't think people quite realize where Japan actually sits in a potential conflict in this area. They're very anti-China within this area. They're very pro-US within all spaces. And Japan, I would say, has the closest and most professional naval ability in this area. They're the ones who will probably be countering China straight up. Them and the US, obviously US would send in their ships, and US trumps everyone. as far as naval power goes. But Japan is actually, surprisingly to a lot of people, Japan has quite a large naval capacity. So very interesting that China's now firing missiles over at them too, on top of all the missiles that they're firing around Taiwan last week. Peter Rouse says Auntie Jacinta banned New Zealand coal, clean coal, but started importing coal from Indonesia, dirty coal. It's interesting. Doesn't make a lot of sense, but what does anything these politicians are doing nowadays make sense? Not much. Okay, Chinese military assumes US forces will dispatch vessels and fighter jets from its bases in Okinawa, which is in Japan, the southern part of Japan, and other parts of Japan to support Taiwan if Beijing launches an operation to seize the democratically governed island of Taiwan. That's pretty obvious. One of the reasons that, there are many reasons why the US still has bases and a lot of forces in Japan, but one of them is as a check to Chinese power and as a reaction force. So I would imagine, I have absolutely no information on this, but it would not surprise me if I saw that the US bases within Japan at the moment are on a high notice to move, being that they're getting ready for war in that part of the world, which seems to be where we're sliding inevitably towards right now. China and Saudi Arabia intensify energy cooperation with critical deal. So we're seeing Biden went over to Saudi Arabia to try and secure some oil. Didn't quite work. Saudi Arabia basically said, hey, we can't increase anything here. Like, you got what you got. This is it. Well, apparently they got a little bit more for China. So China's starting to grease the wheels of Saudi Arabia here, and it looks like Saudi Arabia might be moving to solidify that oil for yuan or yuan deal with China. And this is yet another death blow, another stab into the US petrodollar hegemony. Indefinite collapse. All right, let's jump to Europe. There's a whole heap of stuff that's coming out of Europe in the past 24 hours. And I'm just going to belt through it. It's all sort of the same stuff. Drought is definitely there. UK has actually declared drought in their country. And if anyone's been to the UK, you should know that it's quite green and it rains quite a lot. So the fact that they're in drought is pretty big deal. The Loire River in France has dried up to record levels, according to West France. Sightseeing boats and things like that forced to suspend their work. That's not that big of a deal, but we've got to think about what other industries are coming out of these rivers. The Rhine River is set to fall below a critical mark as the International Environmental Agency, the IEA, warns of prolonged crisis. So it's not like we're just seeing low water levels. Obviously we had low water levels here in 2019, and we have low water levels every probably 5 to 10 years in Australia. And we kind of know at some point the rain will break, it'll flood back in, and we'll go to the other end of the cycle where we've got floods. But what they're looking at the moment, the weather patterns coming into winter, it's not looking good for Europe. And it looks like these record lows, these record droughts are going to continue for some time, and the effects of them are going to continue as well. What else do we got? Nothing left in the pipes. French towns rely on water truck deliveries for survival. So they're having to ship water into some of these towns now. Pretty desperate stuff that's going on there. German security chief warns of upcoming mass unrest. Might be co-opted by quote-unquote extremists. So Germany could be facing mass unrest this autumn and protests over the energy crisis that could be hijacked by extremists, a regional head of country's domestic security agency has said. This is pretty interesting stuff, and it's not for anyone who actually like looks at this sort of stuff regularly, as I do, and also looks at patterns of violence and of civil unrest, it is obvious that that's what's going to happen. And that's why I keep saying, hey, we're going to see more civil unrest throughout the world. You know, this is something we need to think about as humans, as individuals, when we're moving through urban spaces, when we're moving through places where we've got more humans congregated together. There is a potential, there's a much higher potential over the next 12 to 24 months of there being a civil unrest event coming to a town near you. And now, like, obviously this security agency head has come out and said, yep, we're going to see this in Germany. And I think absolutely right. Absolutely right. There's a number of factors that are going in there. Food crisis being the big one. So supply of food, cost of living, cost of energy and fuel, and then unemployment possibly going to come in as a confounding factor as well. Once you get those fighting age males out of work, they've got nothing better to do than burn the town. And that's what they'll be doing in Germany, according to this report. Tear gas, speaking of civil unrest, let's jump over to Italy now. Sorry, no, Sicily. Probably some Italians. It's not Italy, it's Sicily. Tear gas and water cannons were used against demonstrators opposing the installation of NATO antennas in Sicily. So a small town in Sicily, or imagine a small town. Maybe it's not. The NATO was putting in some antennas there, and they've rioted and tried to destroy the antennas. Security forces have come out and launched tear gas and water cannons to try and push them away. We don't want your riffraff around here. Let us put up our antennas. A number of things are going on there, obviously, but I think the main thing that's going on is any sort of installation, like what we're looking at the moment, is a potential war between NATO and Russia. Now, if that happens, Russia's obviously going to target NATO's infrastructure, i.e. things like antennas. So people rightly don't want these sort of things in their town. It would be a potential attack risk. So these people have come out and rioted against it, and they've been shoved off quite harshly. But this sort of civil unrest, again, yet another example of civil unrest that's happening around the world. All right, Britain rations water as drought officially declared, so more rationing of water going on, not just in France, also in Britain. Germany limits public buildings heating to 19 degrees amid energy crisis. That's 19 degrees Celsius for those of you who use some other weird system and don't use the metric system. Oh, by the way, I was over in Europe recently, over in Sweden, and people kept on trying to explain to me, like, oh, when I'm saying meters, I mean this, or when I say, Celsius, I mean this. I'm like, we use metric in Australia. And they're like, oh, really? Oh, we didn't realize. We thought you guys used the imperial system. I'm like, not since like 1967. Like, we haven't used it. I don't know why people think that Australians use imperial system. We use the correct system. Anyway, now let's talk about Serbia for a second, because this one's been sitting on my radar for a little bit, and I haven't really talked about it because it's a little bit confusing, and there's also a lot of propaganda that's going on around this particular area here. Now, I keep talking about the UN not being totally united. I keep talking about NATO countries not exactly working together very well, and I have ad nauseum talked about the EU not being the united front that people think it is. It is a fractious group of nations, and probably nowhere more so than in this particular area here, the Balkans. So in the 90s, there was a big war there. Kosovo, the fracturing of states. And if you go and look at the map right now, go and Google Map, jump in there and have a look around this area where we're looking at like Serbia and Bosnia, all those Balkan sort of states. You'll see a lot of dotted lines around there where there are contested zones and there are areas that aren't officially part of one country or the other because they're both claiming it. This is still essentially a it's like a war that has just gone off the boil. So it was a war in the 90s. It was a horrific war. And, NATO stepped in, and everyone's got an opinion on what happened there. My opinion is that NATO did not do a good job there. NATO did some extremely bad things in that particular conflict, or allowed bad things to happen in that particular conflict. And then the whole thing sort of like just went down to a little simmer, and it's kind of been simmering under the surface for a while. Well, it looks like it's blowing back up again. The problem being here is that some of these states, Serbia being one of them, is kind of has a lot of links to Russia. And this was foreshadowed right at the start of the Russian-Ukraine conflict, that people going, we should look out for these guys here, because all of a sudden that's jumping right into the heart of Europe. And if things start springing up there, which would be a massive benefit, I would imagine, to Putin and his plans, and to Russia. So if things start kicking off here again, it could get quite ugly. We're looking in this former Yugoslavia area. If this explodes again, it could be huge, and it looks like it might be sliding that way at this stage. So this story leads off with Serbia's strongman leader, Alexander Vučić, is fed up with being reviled as Little Putin, intent on aggression against his country's fragile neighbors in the Balkans. However, Mr. Vučić, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, words conceal a serious issue that torments the Balkans and worries Western diplomats. Is Russia, mired in a brutal war in Ukraine, using Serbia to stir division in Europe and provoke renewed conflict in the former Yugoslavia to distract NATO from the battle raging to the east? So this is one of the issues that they're facing at the moment. There has been increases in protests. There has been allegedly roadblocks and gunfire in the area. So this is definitely something that needs to be kept an eye on. Obviously, this kicking off is going to spell a new phase in what's actually happening here. And I have alluded to this before, but it may well be that in history, in time, in the future, we look back at this point in history and we go, we were already in World War III, we just didn't know it. World War III officially started when Russia invaded Ukraine. But at the moment, we're not seeing it that way. It just depends what happens next. And this is one of those things. This is one of those steps in the wrong direction, like China rolling into Taiwan, like North Korea starting to fire missiles at South Korea, like Pakistan and India going toe-to-toe, like Israel and Iran going toe-to-toe. Any of these things could be the step, the line that we cross into that sort of World War III scenario. So let's keep our little fingers crossed that that doesn't occur, and that this sort of simmers down a little bit. All right, where am I? I've lost my spot. Okay, let's jump over to the US now. Blackouts are growing more frequent in the US. The average American experienced just over 8 hours of power outages in 2020, with overall duration of power interruptions in the US more than doubling since 2015. There were a total of 549 policy and deployment actions on grid modernization during the second quarter of 2022. But of the almost $13 billion sent that way, regulators only approved 500 million, so $500 million, according to the NC Clean Energy Technology Center. US power grid is it's old. It's really old. They're pumping money in there, and the money's getting pumped in there under, no surprises there, Biden's green initiative, which I'm not sure what they're actually trying to achieve there. There certainly is ways that you can create a grid, an electricity grid that is a lot greener than the one we have, and a lot more modern. But I don't know if that's what they're doing. No idea. And by the looks of it, from the $13 billion that they've pumped in, only 500 million, so $500 million, has actually been approved. So it looks like, if I was a betting man, I would say power outages are going to continue to increase within the US. Not a great forecast for those guys. Lastly, I just want to talk about this IRS stuff again. Within the US, just madness. So for those who haven't heard about it, they've just approved 87,000 staff increase in the IRS for agents to go out and get that tax dollars. It's like, I remember listening to a story. I was watching a movie on Robin Hood, and the evil sheriff of Nottingham is really squeezing everyone for that last little bit of tax money. And I'm like, how did that come about? How did people let that actually occur? When these people are obviously hurting, there's not much money coming in, and this government agency, the Lords, are taking more money off them. Like, that can't be right. That's silliness. Of course, Robin Hood would come about in this kind of fairy tale. Well, this is it. We're starting to hurt. We're going to hurt more. And the US is apparently doubling down on making sure that it can take more money off its individual people. And again, if you look at the statistics for this, there's a horrifically small percentage of people who earn, I think it was over $200,000 a year, that actually get audited. It's the majority of people who get audited are somewhere in the range of $120,000 to $20,000 a year. That's where most people get audited for their taxes. So 87,000 more employees going into the IRS, but that's not even the key point for this. It was the advertisement for the job, which listed a whole heap of things like you must be willing to work 40 hours plus a week, blah, blah, blah. And this little line here, you must be willing to use deadly force. So this was preceded by, you must be willing to carry firearms. And then as the last part, you must be willing to use deadly force. Now, I've talked about this a lot, and you probably, if you've ever listened to me before, you probably know what my stance is on taxes. I think that essentially tax is theft at gunpoint by our government. And I in fact did an entire YouTube video on this called Why Violence Matters. And it's really laying out that the fundament of our society is violence, in that and I give the example that if you stopped paying your taxes, at some point, people with guns will come and kick in your door and drag you away. And if you were to resist that, then they would probably be willing to use deadly force, as has been highlighted in this particular job, job-seeking article. It's shocking to me that they would actually overtly say this sort of thing. After about 3 days, I think they actually pulled this down. They realized after the backlash from the public that this probably wasn't the right thing to be putting out there. So they pulled it down very quickly, but it's already, like, the cat's out of the bag now. That stuff is all over the internet. So yeah. That's the US though. That's not Australia, right? They don't necessarily need to use deadly force in Australia because not many Australians have firearms. And certainly those who do have firearms are well outmatched by our police force, who habitually walk around in body armor with assault rifles on the streets. So neither of those things an individual a civilian in Australia can own. So we're well outmatched. So pay your taxes, guys. Otherwise, you're going to get shot. You're going to get fucking killed. Yeah, just more ridiculousness. But again, I look at this sort of stuff and I go, well, what is this a symptom of, and what is this showing? What's the underlying problem that we're looking at here from this information? And it tells me that the government is the government of the US, but Western governments are scared, and they're looking at what their finances are, and they're saying, we're spending a lot of money, we're making up a lot of money, we're going to need to get that from somewhere, and that's from human beings. Government doesn't exist without human beings paying their taxes. they realize that. They're getting on shaky ground. That's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing a government starting to get afraid, and fearful governments are dangerous governments. Like fearful men are dangerous men. This is one of those things where I kind of look at it and I go, whew, wow, we're off track as a society here. We are way off track. Anyway, my recommendation as a prepper is to try and, as much as possible, and of course, within the confines of law, reduce your taxable income. Don't give them anything. Don't give them anything. Take the Ride says IRS has been purchasing guns and ammo like crazy. So has the Railroad Commission. I did see that about IRS, that they've been doing bulk buys of ammunition, like crazy amounts of ammunition, like ammunition that a military would buy. And I've also seen from the US, I haven't had verification of this, but there has been a lot of UPS packages that happen to contain firearms or ammunition going missing as well. So what's happening there? Crazy stuff. All right, that's it for today or tonight. Thank you very much for joining me. A little bit of a surprise one, Sunday afternoon. I'm going to go make dinner now. I hope you're all well. I hope everyone's smiling and, still feeling good about their own lives. Yes, there's a lot of craziness going on in the world at the moment. I get that. I feel that too. I'm not immune to that. I get the fear of where we're heading as a society and where our world's going. But part of prepping is trying to control what you can control, which is yourself and your own life as much as possible. Trying to get your ducks in a row, trying to get your things organized. So prepping your finances, prepping your home, prepping yourself, your individual self. So making sure you're taking care of your own body, of your own mind, that we're still learning, we're still seeking knowledge, we're still upskilling ourselves. We're doing all these sorts of things to make ourselves more self-reliant human beings and encouraging each other to do so. Bring more good vibes to this community. This community can be pretty Debbie Downer sometimes on each other, but ain't about that. I'm about giving you the push in the back to start prepping. As always, if you've got any questions, shoot them through to me. Love to hear your questions, love to hear your comments. But apart from that, I hope you have a fantastic Sunday night, or maybe Sunday morning if you're in the US, I guess. Whatever time it is there. Until next time, Semper Paratus.